But my opinion is it could be some conduct disorder, but there's also this whole range of trauma, home environment, and things that have to be taken into account. You can't take a child in a vacuum. And, you know, his home and environment are one of the really important factors in these hearings.
And you've seen countless abused children in your practice, haven't you?
I have.
And isn't it a rarity that one of them commits homicide?
Not necessarily, unfortunately. A good bit of the children, especially all the waiver cases I've done, have all involved children who have committed homicide. I've seen quite a large number. But in terms of the DJJ population,
yes,
in the
on the whole,
right, in the detention center, there was a higher number of murderers there. In the jail before they're adjudicated, and it would depend sometimes on, you know, 1 week you could go in and say if I had a clinic of 20 kids, I might have 5 murderers there. 1 week I might not have any. So there, you know, I don't really know the pattern to it, but it was not uncommon.
But there are certainly more than 5 children abused in South Carolina every day.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And I'm sorry, I think I didn't. So you're saying out of the abused children, I saw how many had committed murder. I'm sorry. By the time they reached a forensic evaluation, probably more than the average, just because they got referred to me.
Well, that's your specialty.
Yes, that's right. That's right. But it's not, no. Children that are abused don't go on to murder their parents. That is not the norm.
Okay, now we're on the same page, but I recognize your specificity. Thank you.
Right.
And in your report on page 17, I believe Jesse told you that he did those internet searches in Greenville that we heard something about from the teacher earlier this week.
Can you just direct me on
Sure,
that?
absolutely. It is number 4 under 7-119, your visit from
Thank you.
July 1st of this year.
Yes.
And so he admitted to searching his name and searching school shootings while he was detained at the Greenville County Detention Center.
Yes.
And he followed up by telling you, I don't like thinking about that stuff, but I had an obsession back then.
Yes.
But yet he tells Dr. Teichner this October that he's still excited when he thinks about the school shootings.
Sure. And obsession and excitement are different. Obsession, before, in 2017, that time, he actually was still wanting to read about it. You have to remember, school shooters, which he is one, he's an abused child, and then he's a school shooter as well. He's had 2 separate crimes, and so they're related, but you have to tease them apart. School shooters, they want to know what people think about them. They want, you know, part of their goal is to be famous or for people to know who they were, that they made a stand. And so he would read about that to kind of see what the public was saying. But what he's done now, as he gets older and he's developing some kind of religion, he knows that that's not a healthy thought. He doesn't like it. And so what he tries to do now when his brain goes there and he tries to think of those things, he tries to think of something religious or read the Bible. He's trying to distract himself, which is a good therapy technique, from thinking about those things.
But his brain still goes there.
Sure, it does.
And in an excited way.
That's the emotion. If he described that emotion, I wouldn't. He's never told me that, but I wouldn't doubt that.
And on page 18 of your report, Jesse can't remember his rabbit's name now.
Right. Right.
Okay. But that was supposed to be the big motivator for killing his dad.
That's repression. What that is that's what you have to take in mind what happened. That rabbit was very important to him. And it doesn't minimize that. What's happened is when Jesse was in the Greenville Detention Center, he functioned quite well. He did have therapy once a week. He had group, he had school. There were a lot of activities. When he got transferred to Anderson County Detention Center, there's just not as many activities. So his anxiety level was very high compared to his behavior. He would have trouble focusing when you were talking with him. He couldn't carry a train of thought. And so, in my opinion, what happened is, as we confronted him with this abuse, what we did each week, if we talked to a family member and got an episode of abuse, we verified it with another family member, went in, and so we were confronting him. I was doing things to raise his anxiety level. He doesn't want to think about abuse. He doesn't want to think about these things. And so, in my opinion, that's called, he was repressed. He couldn't remember. Later, once his name was said, he remembered. But that's a sign to me of anxiety, not that he didn't care about his animal. He couldn't remember being hit with the baseball bat. He didn't remember being hit with the baseball in the back. He remembered his dad throwing it one time and missing him. So these were not protective things that he was forgetting.
But he's calling it the gray and white rabbit, and yet 3 years, he can't remember his pet's name, but he's still thinking about details of the school shooting he committed 3 years later.
Well, I don't know if he was. I don't know if he was on that day or not. But that's not the point. The point is he can't remember because it's related to the trauma. That's provoking for him. He had chances. I could have said, "Tell me about the baseball bat incident." By this point, he couldn't give details anymore. And I think that's a symptom of his anxiety. He's not able to recollect those things because he's not had treatment. And that's kind of why that's one of the reasons I believe he needs treatment. He doesn't remember a lot of these things.
So can you explain to me how that abuse then, that was allegedly purported 4 years ago, is causing him to have zero remorse or empathy today? Is that part of repression?
So this is the way I formulate this case. He's a young man. He's being exposed to chronic abuse, and there's no question in my mind the abuse occurred. I've talked with enough family members, and I've spent hours with them correlating these things to make sure that something did happen, that it's not just one person reporting it against the other. And so I've been very careful about that because that's a hard thing to do. You know, if there's no police reports or there's very little external data. And
it really isn't.
That's correct.
Okay.
But in my opinion, it happened. So you take a young man that's chronically abused. He's functioning in elementary school. He's got some protective things, grandparents, brother. He goes on to middle school, begins getting bullied. So he's having some difficulty at school. Brother's gone, parents continue to argue. He has the same abuse, but he's lost some protective factors. Then you add that he loses his grandparents for a period of time because of the DSS investigation or whatever drama. He loses another support factor while he's still getting bullied in school. So his grades are going down. He gets expelled. He acts out against the bullies. He gets expelled. He loses the distraction of going to school every day. He loses talking to people. He loses having a teacher describe something. He's down there in his room thinking about things. And so he gets a very pre-morbid, deathly preoccupation, both with his own death and mainly other people, much more other people than himself. And then it's unchecked. And not only is it unchecked, he has people encouraging it. So that's kind of the way I see it. So his not showing remorse, I don't know if he has a lack of remorse. He doesn't exhibit remorse. I'm not sure. And it's because you see constricted affect. When people are abused, they have very shallow, it's constricted affect. They're not able to express their emotions like you or I do. They don't have that. The emotions are dangerous for them. So I can't tell you 50% is from him not caring and 50% is from abuse, but I know there's a whole other area that he hasn't had treatment for that we don't know about that has to be considered in that.
Does that explain his ongoing deceitfulness also, or is that something else entirely?
I don't consider him, he's deceitful at times, as most teenagers are, but I don't consider him that to be a main characteristic of who he is. He certainly has deceived, but I don't feel like he's deceptive in every relationship he has. I don't think he uses others or exploits others to get his own needs met. He's isolated. Even in most places, he prefers if he can be alone, reading, studying. When he's put in a room with people, he will get along with them. But I'm not sure that I would that's a persistent, consistent characteristic of him.
Jesse malingered to you as well, didn't he?
It's hard to know. I think the Scooby-Doo thing is certainly an atypical. That is not. I've heard kids say they might hear a really weird voice. I'm not sure. But if he reported these symptoms, he never used them to exculpate himself from responsibility. He never told me voices made me do this. I was hearing these things. What he told me along while I evaluated him is they told him he was a worthless piece of crap. He wasn't saying, oh, I heard this voice and it told me to go smack this guy. He never did that. He said the voices would tell him he was worthless. Negative things, which kind of goes with the negative cognitions you see in children that have been abused. They have very negative outlooks. They blame themselves. They don't think anything will ever be better. You know, and that's why the DSM, it expanded the diagnosis of PTSD, because they realize it's a lot more than just anxiety. It affects the way you act, it affects the way you think. So it's got a lot more reaching effects than just on your mood and your presentation.
You said that he has a good peer group now.
No, not now. Absolutely not. While he was in the Greenville County Detention Center, he picked a peer, the peer that he was close to made really good grades. They would compete on who made the most A's. They motivated each other, and this was a child, he didn't get in as much trouble compared to the other groups of detainees in the jail.
Are you speaking about Miguel Cano?
Yes.
The young man who was recently sentenced for stabbing his mother to death 28 times, I think?
23, but yes.
23? Okay. Well, in the 20s.
Yes.
Okay. And that is the close friend that Jesse had in Greenville?
Yes.
Okay.
And I wouldn't say close friend, he just was picking better people. I'm not sure how much of a friendship in that situation, but that's who he associated with, and he likes them. I think that's fair to say.
Did you see the video of Jesse bullying another child from February 2nd in 2016?
I didn't see the video. I knew of it. He told me that he bullied him.
Okay. So
Yeah.
he admitted that he was doing bullying as well.
Yes.
Thank you. One moment. Thank you so much, Dr. Maddox.
You're
I appreciate
welcome.
Your Honor, Dr. Maddox answers questions.
Do either one of y'all care if I ask a question?
Absolutely not.
Do you have a problem?
it. No, sir.
Is there any way to tell to a reasonable degree of medical certainty whether or not any amount of treatment, whether for emotional or otherwise, will rehabilitate this boy such that later on, whatever sense he may get, he could be productive in society at all?
Yes.
I mean, do you feel like there is a reasonable degree
Yes.
in this case?
If he gets the treatment. And my recommendation is yes. I think if he has trauma-specific treatment, he is just now beginning, the last time that I evaluated him, as he got confronted with all the abuse that he remembers or doesn't remember, he became very anguished, rubbing his hair. It's similar, you could see that he was very uncomfortable. He's got a process, the recipe for him getting better, I think that's the question. He's got to have the specific treatment. He has to understand everything that's happened to him as he can remember. He's got to understand what's appropriate and what's not. I think he will one day be in touch with his emotions. I think that's okay. The one prognostic factor that I think is important for him is he still does have an ability to attach. He cares about people. A lot of people with conduct disorder, they don't care for anyone, whether it's described as shallow or restricted emotion because of the trauma he's been through. He is very attached to his grandparents. He's attached to his siblings, and he's attached to his mother. And he's got a capacity for treatment. I think he's attached to me somewhat over the period of 4 years. And as long as there's a capacity there, I think there's room for growth. There is a concern, if let's say that if we do know that he's conduct disordered and he progressed to antisocial, there would be a concern that he can develop as he grows older where he doesn't care about people. But even then, so at least we know the research shows that, when you're fourth, fifth decade, those behaviors die out. So call me optimistic, but it's my opinion he can be treated, and there is room for rehabilitation in him.
All right, thank you, Dr. Max. Any questions as a result of mine?
No, Your Honor.
Any questions as a result of mine?
No, sir.
All right, they should be excused.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.